know better. Anyway, well, listen, let's get started. Good afternoon. This should have been last week's talk. That's a half an hour one. Again, sorry for the inconvenience of COVID last week. But anyway, I couldn't do anything about that. I'm going to start out with a perspective thing. And it's all about hanging by a thread. And so let's see. Yeah, this paper just blew me away, totally away. None of us would be here if this event had actually gone to completion. This happened 900,000 years ago. It was reported on in Science just recently. And it's based on a large genetic study and tried to work out the number of fertile females at various times back in history. And there weren't many. I mean, around, say, 1 million years ago in Africa, because they were all in Africa at that time, we're talking about maybe 100,000 fertile females. Multiply that times 2.5 or something like that to get the total population. And then all of a sudden the roof falls in. 900,000 years ago, it drops from around 100,000 to 2,000. And it remains that way, more or less that number, for well over 100,000 years. And then there's a partial recovery. And by the way, the fossil record during that period, when the genetic studies suggest this kind of extinction had happened, very few fossils are found, as you might expect. Mm-hmm. And then it begins to recover, but slowly, or only to about 1/3. And it's only in the last 100,000 years that the human population in Africa and dispersal outside of Africa really started to explode. So literally, our species was hanging by a thread. And there's the thread. Right there, isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. We're talking about a thread no larger than 2,000 individuals and going on for 100,000 years plus. None of us would be here if that had actually been severed. None of us. Human history would have been gone, vanished. It's quite extraordinary. We have no clue what happened. Nothing significant happened with respect to climate change, anything else that we know of. We do know of other extinctory events, of course, and I don't want to get into all of this. The Mount Toba eruption 70,000 years ago, the largest eruption ever, the largest crater ever produced. But on the historical record, no evidence of extinction within Africa. So, and I'm not going to get into the other stuff. So, let's move along. Well, to be mindful, what does that mean, to be mindful? I'll get rid of this other stuff, but I thought I should kind of perk your interest to begin with. To be mindful of ourselves and others, social intelligence. Robert Dunbar at Oxford, the big proponent of this, the major driver of, he thinks, of the decrease of brain size, social complexity. And that empathic sense, that the capacity to be able to read others and their intentions and their feelings and their emotions. And of course that was celebrated, wasn't it, in Star Trek? And there was a character in that show, Counselor Deanna Troi, you might remember. She was empathic. And her skill set was to be able to read other people and their feelings. So they were ahead of us today, 30 years ago, in thinking about this. Now, it also means to tap into universal spiritual forces. We're not talking about specific religious traditions here, but tapping into some kind of force in the universe, spiritual or other, and of course use prayer and intercession. But it also means communicating with others without explicit communication. Do you know what I mean by that? What I mean is that some people, couples, long-standing couples who know one another really, really well, or friends like that, they kind of know what the other person's thinking and feeling without even being in the same room. I do remember meeting Ted Scott, who was the Primate of Canada, the Anglican Primate of Canada, in the days when they actually drove around Canada instead of airplanes around Canada to visit the Anglican Church. And the two of them were just marvelous. Jan showed him around to one of the local high schools and that kind of thing. But one of the things I remember about the two of them was how low-key they were. And that they spent hours and hours in their car. And a lot of that wasn't talking. But they kind of knew what the other was thinking or feeling. And of course, some of you know in our generation, sometimes when a spouse dies or a very close friend, people communicate with that person. I certainly know several people who regularly talk to their deceased husband. And there's that sense of awareness of otherness or connection, isn't there? And what we make of that is a whole other thing. But it brought to my mind, remember last year there was a Nobel Prize given in physics for entanglement at a distance. This phenomenon that if you have two particles and they're separated and one does this, the other one does that instantly. And up again here, instantly, no matter what the distance. And Einstein thought that was absolutely so ridiculous that he posed it, but then the experiment showed that in fact it actually occurs. That particles who are entangled to begin with, if you separate them great distances, well, I think that happens with humans, even if they're separated by a continent or two, when they know one another well. So that's to open your mind a little bit as we move along. Oh, sorry. Well, I'll be back into the extinctions. Awareness. Well, awareness. Awareness ranges from no awareness to awareness of others and the environment to an awareness of self. Certainly primates are self-aware. Elephants are self-aware, highly intelligent, well-developed brains in other species. Those species have a self-awareness. And awareness and consciousness are altered by intense physical activity. Runner's high. Fatigue, herbal medicines, hallucinogenic drugs, hypoxia, metabolic changes. We're going to talk about that together with seizures in a minute. Concussion, all those things alter consciousness, if you like, and awareness. And of course, meditative states, I'm sure David has talked about that, we'll talk about that some more. And then there's something we don't talk about, but it's politically very, this collective lack of awareness and or willful indifference, for example, about the impact of climate change on the environment. We've been living through the most horrible summer on record, kind of living proof of this. So, well, this is a wonderful story, and it's one I've told before. He's the most famous pilot ever in the UK, and now deceased, but flew more combat aircraft in different countries than anyone else. He also met some of the higher officers in the Luftwaffe before the war, and fluent in German from courses in Edinburgh, became a pilot in Edinburgh, and flew an American aircraft, a Wildcat. Well, what's so special about that? Well, these aircraft carriers had decks of 300 or 400 feet long. That's not much if something's kind of pitching and rolling. I mean, this is really risky stuff. And if you don't catch the first one or second, you're dead. And one particular flight, one of his jobs, or the carrier's job, audacious, by the way, it was a German merchant ship. They cut the top off and put a landing deck on it. So that's how desperate they were in 1940. And it was there to intercept reconnaissance aircraft, and those are Condors, 4-engine Condors. And they were very hard to shoot down. He went up with another officer and managed to shoot down one, but in the exchange, his aircraft and he was hit. From that moment to the time he landed that aircraft, to the best landing on record, at least the captain in charge of all this said it was the best landing he'd ever seen. He had no memory, no recall. Now, I don't know if you know much about flying aircraft, and certainly landing on an aircraft carrier. Wow, that's a real skill. And there aren't many that do it well. And many of the others are dead, at least at that time. And so this long period of no memory. And it's very similar to post-traumatic amnesia, or another phenomenon I think I wrote an article about in the Lake Report, the tragic global amnesia, where people, and it's probably happened to maybe one person in this group, it's that common, somebody will just spontaneously stop recording memories. And they become quite fitful about this, and it'll go on for hours, maybe a day or so, and then it recovers, and rarely recurs. And it's not a stroke, a migraine, we don't know what caused it. But it was described by a Canadian who's a Harvard prof. So anyway, this is an example, or one example, of disturbed awareness. Well, he was aware of flying this thing. Otherwise, he would have been able to land it, but he had no memory of it. So let's go on. Well, here's another one. Senator Mitch McConnell, age 81. Well, yeah, isn't this lovely? Twice, weeks apart, you may remember this, McConnell developed speech remedy. The video says it all. And I couldn't show you the video, but this blank look on his face, kind of staring straight ahead with no movement of his face or eyes at all. He is holding on to the podium and shows no response to anyone around him for about half a minute. And then his speech a little bit garbled, comes back, he's a little bewildered for the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then he's kind of let off the stage. A lot of neurologists watched that clip, and they first thought, that's got to be a seizure. That's a partial seizure. That's what that is. And that's been denied by the Mitchell or McConnell camp, but I think that's probably true. But remember, this is the same fellow who had multiple falls and a concussion. And of course, a concussion can cause seizures. Or flip it around the other way. If you're prone to seizures, you're much more likely to fall and have a concussion. So it could be either. So it's interesting, this report, in the last 2 years, he has looked increasingly diminished, as the New York Times put it. And he does. He looks frail. So more is happening than they're fessing up to. But it is another example of a disturbed awareness or consciousness. Sorry, back we go. Well, here's another one. I brought this up in the brain series, but this famous series of studies done between Cambridge in England and Amsterdam of so-called brain-dead people, severe traumatic brain injuries. And you can tell how severe they are because just look at, this is the control up here. I mean, this person's missing a good chunk of the frontal lobe here. And over on this side, by the way, it's kind of reversed. It's like looking at the brain from below. But this is the right hemisphere. Almost the whole temporal lobe is gone. It's huge. And so these are severe brain injuries. Nonetheless, these patients were unresponsive, meaning when they were talked to or prodded, that kind of thing, there was no visible response. Well, then they used functional MRI. And to their surprise, in about 10% of them, of these people thought to be brain dead, meet the criteria of brain death, that the brain lit up. Not only, this is the control, but in the same area, same areas, when they were, for example, asked to visualize being in a room say, in your home that you're very familiar with, and walking around through that room, so visualization, or some motor task. Imagine yourself hitting a tennis ball, and the appropriate areas of the brain lit up. So clearly, those few people, I'm not saying there were a lot of them, a few of them, were aware and conscious, even if they couldn't show it. So let's just move along here.
How long does that last?
Oh, here, these people have been in the state for many months, even in some cases a couple of years.
I'm just wondering, with everyone getting cremated,
Oh, I don't know
how
about
do they
that.
know whether you could be brain dead, but you still could?
Yeah, I don't want to push this too much. We're talking about an oddball, a very uncommon thing. I mean, it's certainly unnerved the neurological and transplant groups, because they thought, oh my heavens, if this is happening all the time, where do we get transplant material from? They didn't say that, but that's what they were thinking. Consciousness is enigmatic and a quagmire as far as I'm concerned. There was an interesting meeting in Oxford over the summer, and it included a broad sweep of people, philosophers, neuroscientists, of course, psychologists, and a couple of physicists. I don't think Penrose was there, but they were looking at consciousness. What was the consensus when they looked at it? Well, to make sense of consciousness and awareness depends on defining whatever phenomena that you're observing in ways that are testable, verifiable, and understandable from the perspective of the brain. So consciousness isn't something way out there, Penrose style, outside of our brain. And if that thread had been cut, there would be no consciousness outside on the planet or elsewhere. Follow what I'm saying? Because there's some pretty far out claims here about consciousness. Oh, and the other thing that they insisted on is any discussion of consciousness must include the possibility of consciousness with artificial intelligence. I mean, that's how far along it's gone, or is going. And we're still in the baby steps right now. Consciousness and awareness have deep evolutionary roots, for sure. There are these philosophical notions about the nature of both that go well beyond scientific resolution, as with the claim of Penrose and Schrödinger, well before that. But my own sense is, given the huge gap between what we know and don't know, philosophy plays an important role for expanding our ideas. I think that's right. I'm going to come back to this theme. Fortunately, we are unaware of the vast majority of neural traffic and processing in the brain. It's absolutely true. There's a lot of stuff happening that we're not aware of, and thank goodness. Now, what about, here's another interesting phenomenon. Background processing. How many of you have had this experience? I've had this happen 2 or 3 times. More than a few of us struggling to solve a problem which has eluded us, wakened with the solution.
Yes.
But if we return to sleep without writing the solution down, we might well find that when we waken the next morning, we're unable to remember. Hopefully the next time we're fortunate enough to have the same dream, we will write it down. I've definitely had that experience. And sometimes if I'm writing something, having trouble kind of describing it or something, I've learned to get up and write the thing down. No less than House Krebs of the Krebs cycle, very famous Nobel Prize winner, and he described the metabolic cycle for glucose, sugar. He described an interesting story, the story, true or not, but probably is true, that he's having a lot of difficulty kind of sorting out the sequence of events in this cycle. And has struggled with for months, he and his team. And one night he went to sleep, and he woke up, he had one of those aha moments. Got it. He made the mistake of going back asleep. And in the morning, he couldn't figure it out. Fortunately, this is what he got his Nobel Prize for, by the way. Fortunately, he kind of had another dream, the same thing. This time, he got up and wrote it all down, and so he might not have got a Nobel Prize here. Well, here's something that you'll recognize in this area. I was out biking one time in the summer. This would have been in late July. You can pretty much tell it would be mid-afternoon. Cumulus clouds are forming, but stable. And nothing else happening than that. Well, an hour and a half later, on my way home, here's an obvious thunderstorm. There's the rain coming down. And they come down from Hamilton. They just kind of come down with kind of these bubbles kind of come down. But the point is, they disturb the atmosphere and they sometimes disturb us. And it certainly happened to me because my neighbor, this is just our property is right here, but this is creek number 1. And there was a heavy rain, just about 2 hours I was in, right out onto the Gage Street, and over the other side, flood. No flood in my basement or any of the neighbors. But anyway, that can happen. So there's stress. This is what's happening here. Now, so stress, what is it? What can we do about it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about it just briefly. As soon as I get to where we are. So, it's no surprise, sorry, back to go. Stress is part of living. For sure it's part of living. Is there anyone in this room that hasn't experienced stress? Absolutely not. And probably fairly common. Short-term stress, as we getting ready to give this talk, is really common, and it often brings out the best in us, right? At least I hope it does. In my case today, or preparing for exams or a tennis match or whatever it is. U.S. Open recently. Sometimes the source of the stress is manageable, but other times may be impossible to avoid. I'm not sure I agree with this statement. Managing stress has as much to do with how we handle it as the nature and source of the stress. And I wrote down, this came from another source, and I thought, well, I had a friend since died maybe 20 years ago, a psychiatrist in London, who lost all of his family in one of those death camps, and horrible things. And he was one of the wisest people I have known. But we sometimes had discussions about, well, what's it like, and how did you manage? How did you get through that? And well, he said, not being angry or bitter. That's a short way to death. Try to help somebody out. Provide warmth. Snuggle up to them. Share a little bit of food. Or, he used one phrase, if you can get it, share a flower. You could be shot for picking a flower. So there was something very valuable, but also a sense of beauty, of nature outside of that horrible camp. I thought that was an interesting thing for him to say. He talks about stress. The acute stress response. Well, we were all aware of this, an increase in blood pressure and our pulse and respiratory rate. And if we're roiling in our gut sometimes, larger pupils, the hair stands on end. But release of hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline and the release of glucose and fats into the blood. This is all kind of in prep for what you're experiencing or about to experience. So that all makes sense. That's normal physiology. There's nothing pathological about that, unless a lot of it happens. The relaxation response is the opposite of that. So I'm not going to read it all, except it's interesting that the relaxation response downregulates genes that are related to inflammation and upregulates genes which regulate blood sugar and cellular energy production within mitochondria. All of our cells have several hundred of these little packages that make energy, I call mitochondria. So, That's just the risk. This is what we're really talking about, risk of long-term stress. And we don't have to go through all of it, but this is the big one: hypertension, stroke, heart attack, arrhythmia, cardiac arrhythmias, heart failure for sure. And certainly can aggravate joint problems. We have rheumatoid arthritis, probably aggravate that and make it worse. And insomnia. Sleep deprivation is really costly. If your sleep is disturbed, that's a really costly thing to the body. And that's when the brain literally takes out its garbage. And if it's doing a lot of extra work processing in that time, then you're asking it to take out the garbage and do other things at the same time. And so that's not a very efficient operation if it doesn't work, and there is a cost to it. Stress management, as you might expect, is to reverse all of that. And there are unhealthy, we're up familiar. I mean, you can read this stuff as well as I can. And we recognize it sometimes in ourselves and certainly those around us. But this has become a really big one, isn't it? Because it's in childhood, teenage years, it's throughout life. People streaming all the time. I mean, they're walking down the street in Noble, the main street, probably a third of the people you go by are playing with their phone. Or you go out to dinner and there's a couple sitting there. They must have paid a lot of money for the dinner, but what are they doing? This kind of thing. And it's really addictive. And it's because the algorithms are addictive. They kind of lead you on and suck you in. And that's being discussed now in Congress in the United States. Right? That's a big thing. And rightly so. Now, this is a very fine man that I knew. He was trained at Dartmouth in the United States and an intern in London. One of the wisest people, one of the nicest people I ever knew. And I bring him up as an example because Peter was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, cardiologists in North America to promote early exercise after following heart attacks, meaning out walking a week later. Remember, the norm with polio, with this, with discs, were to put you to bed for 6 weeks. That was the norm. That is not a good thing. That's a bad thing to do, as we kind of learned. Well, he founded the Center for Activity and Aging in London, but the thing that I most remember about it, he also helped many of his colleagues and his patients, and probably himself, manage stress creatively for the long haul. And I had, at University Hospital in London, I had a neurosurgeon, John Gerben, the immediate office beside me. And for 2 years, I mean, I knew John quite well, but around 5:36, I'd see 1 or 2 people kind of dropping in. They were all staff people. And I thought, what the hell's going on here? So I asked John one time, he said, well, those are people going through a bit of a rough patch. And they just want somebody to talk to. And I thought, well, before mindfulness, before meditation, before all the stuff that we're talking about now, there were people who did those kinds of things and still continue to do those kinds of things and have the capacity to do it and do it very well. And Peter was like that, and so was John Gerben, and I can think of a few others on the fingers of both hands in my career who functioned that way, bless them. Now, here's something I want to bring up. I've said this for the umpteenth time, we are unaware of most of what goes on in our environment, right? True. Some of what we're unaware may adversely affect our emotions. But because we're unaware of the link between the two, we may be powerless to do much about those emotions. Partners, friends, John Gerben, and Recklitzer and others, and sometimes trained professionals, but sometimes I think when you professionalize it, it doesn't work as well. May be helpful in identifying those triggers, which provoke negative emotions in us, and hence be well placed to help us be more constructively aware of our demons. and even suggest positive ways to deal with it. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that slide. I think that's absolutely true. And I think many of us, most of us, at times in our lives, we can't figure it out. And others around us who know us well, that we trust, are what I call safe people. They don't spill stuff. Nothing goes any further than them. And they have good sense and judgment. Those people are gold. There are probably a few of you that do that. And that's really important. So if you do, thank you. What works? I'm sure David's talked to you last week about this, but it is very important. The Society for St. John the Evangelist, that I have some connections with, I mean, the brothers there, they're Episcopalian or Anglican, as you might like, but, they set aside in the rule of life an hour a day. That is sacrosanct, an hour a day. Now, there might be other times as well. You need a time. Jeffrey Trissom, I'm a big fan of, described, he had a parish in the south of England, and he described a working class parish. And there was one mother, the father, I don't know where the father was in all of this, but she had a lot of young kids, and they were overwhelming. Not bad kids, just busy kids. And she set aside, as Jeffrey said, there was a room under the stairs, Harry Potter style. Remember that? Room under the stairs? And it was sacrosanct. Kids were told, I don't want to hear you, I don't want to see you, I'm here, I'm in my place. And that was her place. And it's well to say, well, it's all very fine to say, set aside 20 minutes or half an hour, but 20 minutes, half an hour where? That's safe. That actually is a way. But there are ways around that, aren't there? I mean, that space could be out running, out walking. You don't have to be talking to people. You can actually be safely by yourself. It actually works. And have a meditative experience by yourself, out in nature. Could it be any better than that? Emory House, the SSD in Boston, they have the monastery in Boston on the Charles, but they have another house out in the countryside in New Hampshire, which is beautiful. So what a great place for a retreat. All of this David will be talking, or has talked about, I'm sure. Well, here's one thing I do want to say before I close out. Teaching mindfulness and meditative practices to reduce stress. In the United States, there's been a big movement to teach this to kids. And that's happening with my grandson, who's now 14, but in Alaska. Interestingly enough, in a Roman Catholic school. And one of my very good friends, Peter Castle, who did a sabbatical one time in Japan, remembers visiting the Toyota plant. And they work as teams. And they help one another out. Isn't that what you want? Ford plants, they weren't doing that in those days, or GM or anything like that. You were all on your own. But they had teams. Now the problem with aging and stress is that we begin to lose our props, our neural props. We lose cells, we lose connections, our brain isn't what it was 10 or 20, 30 years ago for sure. But we're losing friends. We're losing our network. And so the rug's slowly being pulled as we get older. So fewer resources to kind of do things. So lucky are those who still couples or connections or have good friends. That's very important. Well, I'll just close out. I started the first talk, Tara Parker Pope, a wellness columnist for the New York Times. She just switched, I don't know why. After 15 years, went to the Washington Post to do the same job. But she talks about a lot of the vocabulary is new age stuff right now, but the wisdom is old. And so it talks about inner fitness and mental, emotional, and as she progressed, the importance of spiritual skills. I certainly buy that. practices, and resilience. That's a big word, resilience. But we recognize it. Give yourself a break. Be generous. Volunteer. I sometimes have a little, a lot of the stuff. If you circle the number of times it's yourself or me, it's around 3 times there. And some of the stuff has a little bit of a ring of, dare I say, selfishness about this. And you show gratitude because it's good for you. What about the person? It just seems a little bit much, but I don't mean that. I think for most it's quite the opposite. But still, it has a bit of that ring. Here's my cartoon. I'm busy right now, dear. Would you find out who's making all that fuss in the back of the cave? So, very close couple sent the husband out to find him. So that's a saber-toothed lion, right? Who regularly lived in caves, as did cave lions. And so Neanderthals and modern humans often cohabited caves with animals like this. Okay, I think that's it. And it is it. So, all right, so all yours, David. And I now move there.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Bill. That was very interesting, and we'll lead into some of the things I'm going to talk about.
You need this?
Well, I don't think so. She put it on me last week, I guess, just for recording.
I mean, I don't think we need it. But I think part of the reason is for
I think it's
YouTube.
to record it.
Yeah, for YouTube. Okay, can I see it?
Of course. Now we can turn this off. Can we turn it off?
You mean the screen?
Yeah,
Oh,
the screen.
don't you like a black hole behind you?
No.
Oh, that's too bad. Just for that, I guess so much other slides. I don't know how to turn that on. That's smart.
Well, unplug it.
Remember I had COVID.
Well, unplug it. Incidentally, he was tested negative before he came. Well, unplug it.
Oh, there you go.
It's all.
We're leaving the outer world and the black holes and all of that and going into the inner world. One of the things that Bill mentioned towards the end that is important in meditation that I would have left for a later class. But if you're really going to get the hang of meditation, you have to do it regularly. There's really no trick. We'll talk about it, we'll have some experiences with it during the course. But if you want to learn what meditation is, you have to practice. And it's just like anything else, golf or baseball or knitting, you don't get it unless you practice. And with meditation, the best way to practice is to set a set time and a set place to do it. Now, most commonly, the time is when you first get up in the morning. And one of the advantages of that, well, you might not get up in the morning, but the earlier you get up in the way, the best. Before there's much activity out there, while the world is still quiet, before you've had a whole lot of thoughts and thinking and worries and plotting what you're going to do that day. So your mind is a little more at rest. And the idea to do it then would be first thing. I try to meditate at 6 in the morning. It's not necessary, but I'm just saying if you're going to establish a regular practice, 6 in the morning would be a good time. 7 is fine, 8, but when there's less activity out there. And again, it's important that you practice meditation to get it. And I know it takes a bit of practice. So that's the benefit of establishing a habit. So we talked again last week about consciousness, feelings, and emotions. And consciousness came up again. And of course, it is a huge field. It can be very complex and can go on and on what parts of the mind, brain, and so on are involved. For our purposes, though, consciousness is, for these purposes, the awareness of yourself, who you are, how you feel, what your emotions are, what's going on inside you, and an awareness of the world, where you are in the world. And for our purposes, that's what we're talking about in consciousness, yourself in the larger world. So we only have half an hour, so I want to do as much actual meditation as we can. So we're going to get right into it. Except I've already lost the matches now.
Excuse me.
I got my
Excuse
I
me.
got my family.
Okay.
So, like last week, we're going to, oh yes, there was one thing. I was shown a book on yoga for dummies, which has a very important point in it. When you first start to meditate, what often happens is you become aware of your thoughts, and you become aware of many thoughts, and they may have feelings and emotions attached to them when they're stronger. And that may be your first experience with meditation, and for quite a long time, perhaps a couple of weeks. You're trying to meditate, all you're doing is you're aware of your thoughts, your feelings, and emotions. And as we talked about last week, you just let them go. You let them go as though they're clouds in the sky. Just let them float away. You don't concentrate on them. You certainly don't get into a chain of thoughts where, you haven't bought dinner yet, you've got to go to the grocery store, you've got to go to the bank first, you don't know if you'll have steak, fish, or vegetables. No, you want to let that go. So you let everything go by. There are other forms of meditation which we'll get onto in a further session once we've really established this very easy form of meditation. You simply let your thoughts go by. And that is which is used more in what they call mindfulness, which is just another meditation technique. It's a little different. We'll do it after we've established this more simple kind of meditation. Today we're going to, yes.
So
yes.
could you not light the candle, because when you stop the candle, the fumes just give me asthma.
Ah, okay. Well, last time.
Sorry, or I can leave the room.
No. Last time the whole candle burned down. We had a wind blowing. This time it'll just sit here very gently. I don't expect it to burn more than
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So we're going to do essentially that simple meditation. We're going to add one factor to it. And that'll be a very rudimentary breathing technique. And what we're going to do is breathe in peace, light, love, and breathe out stress, negative thoughts, and any worries or anxiety that you have. So breathe in lightness, love, and breathe out negativity, worry, and stress. But we'll start with just a regular meditation so that you concentrate when you let your mind go, when you when you feel that you're thinking thoughts again, you bring back your attention to the flowers or to the candle. If it's the flower, you can actually trace around with your eyes so that will keep you distracted. If it's the candle, you may get these beams. We didn't get them last week because the candle was guttering. Just let that go and look at the flowers if it bothers you. We'll do a relaxing technique beforehand. Take a deep breath and then go into the meditation. Are there any questions? And again, this is the simplest form of meditation. It's the easiest way to do it. And you're expected to notice what's going on in there. In fact, just before we get going, I'll read. It should be much less aggravating than last week. I'll just read what I did last week. this is the simplest, most straightforward definition of meditation I'd ever heard. So watch the functioning of your own mind in a calm and detached way as you gain, so in order to gain insight into your own behavior. So I'll read it again. Watch the functioning of your own mind in a calm and detached manner so you can gain insight into your own behavior. So, there we go. Can everybody see the candle? I'll move this. Distract. Okay. Oh yes, the eyes, either you can have your eyes open or closed. I prefer the lion's gaze where they're half open and half closed, so that you're aware of what's going on in the inside and aware of what's going on in the outside. As I say, anything that comes along, just let it go like clouds in the sky. Your hands relax. The typical yoga thing, you see people holding them like this. I personally simply hold mine like this, but just hold them in a position that's relaxed and calm and easy and comfortable.
Is it in through the nose and out through the mouth, or just in through the nose and out through the nose?
For this one, in through the nose and out through the nose. There are a lot of complicated breathing techniques which we'll get into later. So, relax. Relax your feet. Relax your ankles. Your calves, feeling very relaxed. Your knees are relaxed. Your upper thighs, totally relaxed. Your abdomen, just let it go. Your hands, relax your lower arms. Your upper arms. Relax your neck. Take a cleansing breath, deep breath, and let it out. Start the meditation concentrating on the candles and the flower. Whenever you feel thoughts coming, bring them back to the flower or the candle. So slowly come back to this consciousness, your awareness. You're in a room, an OTL library. Just relax and slowly come back. So, how long did it take? How long was that?
15 minutes.
15, 10. It was 12 minutes, but I know last time we had a few people where it seemed much shorter, which is really what we're aiming at. And I didn't talk about your posture. The idea is to keep your spine erect, and just see how we're doing our time. We're just on 3 o'clock, so you keep your spine erect and sit up clearly. And one reason that's done is Hindu philosophy, they talk about chakras and their energy points in the body. Somebody called Joe Dispenza also talks about them in a vernacular without the Hindu terms and discussions, but essentially they're energy points. And we'll do a meditation next week on bringing the energy up through the spine, which is why it's necessary, and actually down through the crown into the body. And that's yet another technique which we'll do next week. We'll probably also do a short music meditation, which some people find easier. And coming up, we'll also be doing visualizations. And before we all go, again, as I talked about last week, oneness, the feeling that we're all in this together, that human beings are all the same. They have the same kind of brain as Bill showed, but they have the same kind of emotions, the good, positive emotions, love, peace, openness to humanity. And we all suffer from the same negative emotions, but they're not unique to us. We have them, but so does everybody else. And we're not that different than each other. So envy, jealousy, anger, getting along with one's relatives and so on, all of this is common. And part of meditation shows you that oneness. You sink into that place beyond the brain, you're letting your feelings and emotions go, and that is the state that we're all in. Everyone has that core feeling that you can reach during meditation. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is good.